All righty, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the now world famous Red, White, Claret, and Blue show. I am your host, Alex Island Cowboy Bacaro, and together with my co-host, Chris, who gets no name today, we are your American villain voices. And as always, we will be serving up the lukewarmest of lukewarm opinions, no matter how many hot takes want to jump up in our mentions. Before we dive into that, though, please go check out the socials linked in the show notes. Hopefully we have converted at least a couple of you loud Twitter follows into some new listeners. So welcome. Water's fine. It's lukewarm. Check us out on Apple, Amazon Music, YouTube, and Spotify. Chris, how are you? I'm doing excellent. It is a hot, sweaty day in North Carolina, going to be all week.
It sure is, yeah. And I am doing great, if a little warm, although the air conditioner is cranking here at the Condit House. I just want to say there's nothing more perfect about this podcast other than the fact that we release the pod that gets the most attention that we've ever gotten, far more than like our interview with Paul Faulkner. And I'm still shocked by that. And then we couldn't release one for another week and a half because you and I both had different responsibilities with our jobs or otherwise. But I'm doing well. Things are going great. And I'm looking forward to discussing some hot football finance.
That's what we have you for. You have the glasses. I have the glasses. We are here to be nerds about this whole thing. So since you said it, wow, I'm still on vacation brain. So for everyone who's unaware, I just got back at 12:30 last night from St. Croix because I would much rather live there with a horse on an island. Actually, fun fact, Chris, everybody has a horse in St. Croix pretty much. Our instructor said that kids in the ghetto ride horses. It's not an elitist thing down there. So I'm an avid.
Man,
I think they just there is wilderness everywhere there. I think they're just eating kind of like goats. They're just eating every leaf that they can find.
Okay.
But I am an avid horse girl. I got to once again be an avid horse girl on an island, baddie on the beach, if you will. And so I still have a little bit of vacation brain, but it's okay. We're gonna gut right through this and talk about the lovely world of stadium naming rights. So as we alluded to in the upfront, I'm not even going to caveat this with a may have. We dominated Villa Twitter for a good 4 or 5 days there. And if any of you do not have a Twitter, well, you can't really go back and check it out. But we released some news from a source in an exclusive way. And all of a sudden, you just saw well-known Villa accounts popping up with, what if Villa sold the name to naming rights to Villa Park? Well, here's what I think it would be worth. Here's what I don't. There were some cosigns. There were some prominent accounts that said that they were hearing different things. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there was a clip that was circulated on Twitter of us. I think all my favorite responses, though, were why would they tell these Yanks that they're selling the naming rights to Villa Park? Obviously not understanding how we come about some of our knowledge or the people that we've gotten on this podcast before, not saying those are connected, but
they're definitely not, for the record. I'm saying
they are 100% not connected, but just saying we are in and around this and we are able to procure some information. Let's clarify something real quick.
Yeah.
We did not say that the naming rights to Villa Park are being sold yet. Our report was that the higher-ups, the executives within Villa, have now determined that they are going to sell the naming rights to Villa Park, and they are actively seeking buyers. A lot of people came with some sort of take around, I don't care because I'm going to call it Villa Park anyway, and or the take of, and Justin Talks Villa, kind of rightly pointed out, there may not be much value in this because people will continue to call it Villa Park. And so that's something that we're going to discuss in a second. You've obviously done some research into what naming rights go for. what I will say from my experience, again, completely unrelated to the naming rights of Villa Park. This is something that we study and that we bring into those valuations. The quote unquote stickiness of the existing name versus the new one. You could even do it with sponsored names. How many people call it crypto.com arena as opposed to the Staples Center still? Right?
Yep, exactly.
So yes, there is going to be some pricing for the fact that Villa Park, Old Trafford, St. James Park, etc., are these legacy names that are very hard to remove out of the cultural consciousness. That being said, we also have to remember that they are getting value from the global visibility that Villa Park derives, not just from Villa fans. You power on FC 25. It's not going to be Villa Park. It would be Adidas Villa Park or Adidas Park or something like that. You've got a lot of people playing that game that aren't necessarily Villa fans, might not know the history. You've got the broadcasting rights on Sky. You've got it here in NBC in the United States. They will 100% be referring to it as Adidas Park, not Villa Park, moving forward. And those are
whatever the name actually is.
He's saying whatever. Hypothetically, Adidas, Fortress. I actually kind of like the people that said Fortress because that's a related company, but that's neither here nor there. There are a lot of quote unquote impressions and people that would be exposed to this company's brand. It gives them legitimacy. You're paying for the fact that an institution like Villa, an institution like the Premier League, is essentially co-signing your company and saying that it's worthwhile. Right. So this was a big thing when Crypto.com, for example, when crypto companies were trying to legitimize themselves. There's a reason why they bought into sport. There's a reason why the PIF keeps buying into sport. People think that their favorite teams are legit and would fully vet these companies. Clearly, they did not in the case of the crypto companies and a former client of mine. But the point is there that you gain some sort of legitimacy and some value, not just with the fan base of that one specific team, but of the fan base as a whole. Now, is it worth the same if all these Villa fans are saying on Twitter that they're going to keep calling it Villa Park? No. So stop. Say that you will call it whatever they name it, as long as we know in the back of our mind we're going to keep calling it Villa Park so we could get another couple million out of it. And with that, Chris, tell us, what do you think Villa could get out of the naming rights?
Yeah. So there's a lot of speculation around this topic, not just in the Premier League, but across European football, because it sort of is like a great untapped market potential that really nobody has tried to maximize, or not too many clubs have tried to maximize, because it's untraditional in Europe and in the UK to name your stadium after a sponsor unless it's a brand new ground, pretty much. So most of the estimates, and that's really what they are, because even though these clubs have to release their financial statements every year, they don't necessarily have to list out line item by line item how they come by this money. I suppose that if the Premier League were to ask deeper questions, they may need to provide background in for example, like Manchester City, where you just see, payments that don't line up, and the Premier League says, well, what is this for? Where did you get this 80 million pound or whatever it may be? But they don't have to line item out what each source of revenue is. It can all be tied under sponsorship, for example. But the estimates all seem to land for Premier League teams roughly in the last 5 years that have naming rights, somewhere between 7 million and 12 million pound annually, which to you and I as Americans is exceedingly low. Americans naming rights deals tend to be north of $10 million to $20 million, depending on market, location, all those sort of things.
They're also incredibly long, I will add.
Right. Well, and that's
we talk about like 10 years for a lot of these EPL stadiums, whereas in the US, you're talking 20 plus year deals. And part of the reason for that is promotion and relegation and how much teams can vary over a 10-year span in how much they're worth. But sorry to cut across you. Keep going.
No, that is a really good point to raise. The best example of this, probably, even though there maybe not, it may not be relatable because it doesn't have the same history as Aston Villa or Villa Park, is Brighton. When they rebranded as Amex Community Stadium, the terms of that agreement seem to be, and the source here on this is the New York Times and the Athletic. The terms of that agreement seem to be pretty set at somewhere around £100 million for 12 years. So they signed that deal in 2019, just as a reference point. So you would think if Brighton were able to get,
sorry for just to do the math for everybody, we're looking at about eight and change a season.
Yes, correct. So if you think that Brighton can secure that from American Express, obviously an American credit company, if Aston Villa were going to a similar type sponsor, an American sponsor, again, we don't know anything, but if that's the market that they're going after, and it would make sense that they would, because that's the growth model is going to be in the US and in Asia. You would expect that 6 years later, inflation, bigger, more attention on the sport as it is now, you would expect that they would be able to secure more, especially since it's such a historic club, even if it is something of a sleeping giant until recently. So you would expect, I would think, somewhere around 10 to 12 million pound is a reasonable expectation annually over probably a 10-year period, because they're still going to, even though Aston Villa right now are in no threat of relegation, that's always going to be a sort of worrisome clause in the back of the mind of the sponsor and the people doing this sort of agreement. I mean, if you look back at like Leeds, when the group out of San Francisco or California, the 49ers were buying the club, like everything else, they had a release clause on the relegation of the team. And if they were relegated, they got it for a significant discount, obviously, because you're back in the championship and have to do the work to get back up. So you're going to have the same sort of clauses, I would think, or at least the same sort of hesitation with a buyer or a sponsor in this case. But I would expect 10 to 12 million pound to be the landing spot. I saw some people putting ridiculous numbers out there on Twitter on the tweet that we put out, or at least circulating that tweet, where they're talking about 25, 50 million a season and things like that. And that's unrealistic. And that would get flagged by the Premier League right away as inflationary and not accurate to market value.
Yeah, I mean, if Man City wins their case, then who knows who's buying
now
it
we're talking.
And for how much. Now we're talking. But no, I think you're right. You know, the 10 to 12 million, a couple things to keep in mind. That's probably the best comp that we're going to get. Brighton, what'd you say, 6 years ago? You know, they're floating around mid-table, could go up, could go down. You look at someone like Villa, much more established, probably picking the right time to sell on the back of 3 straight years of European football, 1 goal away from making the Champions League this past year. So there's a lot of optimism. They've proven their case with Unai Emery and all that kind of stuff. So you have to think that it's going to be a little bit higher. That being said, as we discussed before, you're going to balance that against some potential lost value of the fact that Villa Park is a much more historic, renowned, no offense to any Brighton fans, but like well-known stadium. The FA Cup semifinals used to be in Villa Park every single year. So, you know, you're trying to rename something that probably has a little bit more staying power. To your point about relegation clauses, the other thing that could be included and that I would assume the club is going to try to include are European bonuses. So that 10 to 12 million could go up by another couple if Villa make Champions League for a couple years in a row, or make Europa League or something like that. You saw the flip side of this with Manchester United supposedly needing to return money to Adidas and whatnot for their repeated failure to make Europe. But it would only behoove everybody. There's going to be increased value from increased games, all that kind of stuff. So that would be a way for Villa to extract a few more pennies out of whatever that deal is.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah.
So that's one component of PSR. Obviously, 10 to 12 million. We're looking at it's a couple guys' wages. That is, maybe a lower tier youth player that we bring in. But let's talk about the other PSR components that are coming around. There was a lot of fear that we spoke about before of Villa sales, some sort of fire sale that was going to happen before June 30th. And we were saying, well, while there is some smoke, a lot of the reporting out of the club is saying that they're not super concerned about this. They are concerned about the wage bill because of that wage ratio that UEFA uses to calculate for European competition, but not so much English Premier League PSR rules for player sales. And I think that, as these rumors have really calmed down, we haven't really heard much new about Leon Bailey. Now, granted, he's at the Gold Cup with Jamaica. The only thing that continues to simmer is the Emi Martinez rumor. But before we were talking Kamara, we were talking, there were rumors around Tielemans. There was Onana going to Saudi Arabia, JJ Ramsey, 40 million going to Spurs. And all of those seem to have died out a little bit. Whereas I feel like at this point last year, each day there was a new piece of news that made it closer and closer to Douglas Luiz leaving.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, Chris, but I'm actually now not expecting much, if anything, to happen prior to June 30th. I do think that we will need to sell to buy. Now, granted, we did already have our first buy of the summer with the youth player Zepiqueno. So we are still buying without selling. So that makes me more confident that we may not be in that much of a PSR hole. And while we will see some outgoings to bring some more people in, not the nightmare scenario that everybody thought it was going to
be. I think you're probably right there. And what you seem to see, and there is the one that there's smoke around right now is Emi Martinez. But you're seeing Emi Martinez and Aston Villa are interested in Chevalier, right? So it's still a sell to buy situation in Villa's eyes. And like we've said before, you have to credit Monchi so far because he's come right up to the line and always managed to stay on the right side of it. And that appears to be the case now. And you figure if there's going to be a sale, I still think the obvious candidates are the ones we've already talked about. It's going to be Emi Martinez. It's going to be Leon Bailey. Again, Boubacar Kamara, if he doesn't sign a new contract, is a player that you want to sell because you're going to maximize value if he's not going to stick around. But, I mean, then you saw Onana went on like a media tour talking about how much he loved all the players that he was playing with at Aston Villa. So that doesn't seem like a guy who's going to go, Marcus Rashford isn't taking a cut on his wages, so he's probably not coming back unless it's on loan at a reduced wage, where Manchester United are still paying his wages. So I don't think, kind of like you and I discussed before, there will be some outgoings, but they're going to be outgoings that make not just financial sense, but sense to build to the future, because the club, I think, understands that they can't always be in this cycle of we have to sell players to get under PSR, and we just need to keep finding, the undervalued players, the John McGinns of the world that we can buy for peanuts, and they become the team captain 5 years down the line. That's just unsustainable eventually, and to compete at the level that Villa want to compete, we have to spend real money. So I do think the long-term plan is a growth plan to get out of this model. And we're seeing that happen year over year, where we're getting closer and closer and closer to a more sustainable player model, where we're not selling every single season to be able to make bigger purchases or at least to buy low and sell high. You're always going to do some of that. Even Manchester City does that. But I think the club is healthier than maybe even I thought after some of the rumors that started coming out.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, at this point, you're seeing more rumors about guys that we want to buy
Mm-hmm.
There's apparently a ton of hype around this guy from the winger from Betis. There's now some rumors today about another Dutch player, I want to say a PSV striker that they're very interested in. So where again, like you said, where there's smoke, there's fire. The only two things that I want to cover on some of these outgoings. Emi Martinez. Every rumor that I'm reading at this point almost seems to be more coming from the Manchester United camp to try and force Villa's hand rather than something that sounds like it's coming from the player. And that is just something that I'm reading into the way it's being phrased. We've said this before. Everything that we've heard from Emi Martinez is that he wants to compete at the highest level to win trophies, titles, etc. He's not necessarily motivated by money that way. He's motivated by prestige. And right now, I just don't see how he could look at a Manchester United and think that there is more prestige there and more opportunity to win things than at Aston Villa. Now, granted, Manchester United has won a couple League Cups and whatnot in recent seasons, whereas Villa have not. But still, now here, I'm going to contradict myself in one sentence here, and I'll say this. If the options for Emi Martinez are Manchester United or go to Saudi Arabia, I think he's going to want to go to Manchester United. And that might be what we're reading a little bit, is that he loves Villa, but if Villa says we're done with you, we need to move you on, he's going to say, well, move me on somewhere where I can compete. And I just, every fiber of his being, from what I understand, would hate going to Saudi Arabia at this point in his career, especially after the season he just had. And so if his options are Al Nassr or Man U, I don't really blame him for wanting to go to Man U, I guess. Well, it would really hurt, but I wouldn't blame him.
Douglas Luiz is rumored to come back to Leeds because he wants to be back in England. You know, that's a real draw, being back in the Premier League. Now, granted, Dougie's had a tough go in Italy, but like being back in the Premier League, being back in the biggest league in the world is a draw for these players. And I would understand why Emi Martinez would rather go to a rival Premier League team, especially one like Manchester United, which as poor as they've been for the last several years, it's still that badge that everybody knows and that club that everybody knows. And, you know, if he's the goalkeeper that gets them back to Champions League and wins them a, you know, league title or something like that, then he's a legend, you know, and that could be appealing for him. But I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen at this point because nothing seems to be set in stone, and there's certainly no panic from Aston Villa. I mean, we're a week away from the deadline, and the rumors are dying out more so than building, like you said.
Yeah, agreed. So let's let that die out for a little while, and let's look ahead to the new season. Not that much vacation brain, my friend. We've got a couple things here about the schedule and a couple things that need to change. We're doing this in lieu of a season recap because, as we said earlier, it's just been too crazy to do one. We may do a 24-25 retrospective later this year because I do think that it needs some sort of adjudicating for how up and down it was.
Should we do an award show where we get coat and tie and, like, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's not a bad idea. Let's do some show prep on the air right now.
Maybe we'll film that one together.
There we go.
All right. So, Chris, the schedule is out. Want to talk about a couple parts that stick out to you. First off, we'll go through the easiest run, a run that we're nervous about, and then just any other things that we've noted that we think are worthwhile for people to know. So what do you think is the easiest run or a run that you're really looking forward to potentially picking up some points?
I mean, I think if you look at the schedule from start to finish, to me, it's pretty obvious. And I don't know if you're going to have the same opinion or not, but I think the beginning of the schedule is where we need to make hay. We can't have a slow start because if you look, I mean, Newcastle at home. So I think that's going to be a game where, like, we agree to beat the daylights out of them and it's going to be 5-1 at home and then we'll lose to them 6-2, at St. James, like we have for the last couple of years, right? But then
a couple of years, it's like 2 decades.
Right. Yeah. But then after that, like it's all winnable games, even with a bogey team in there here and there. Like you got Brentford, Palace, Everton, Sunderland, Fulham, Burnley, Spurs away, and then like right before Halloween, you get to Man City at home, Liverpool. Like so, I really think in those first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games, you need to really try and rack up points because the schedule gets difficult from that point on. And I, not to say that, like we always talk about, winning games in the Premier League is difficult, all of them, every single one. But that schedule is more favorable than the festive period and the end of the season, in my opinion.
I had the same answer. So just for argument's sake, another area that I'm looking at is basically like mid-January to the end of February. So you've got Everton, Newcastle away, which let's just chalk that up as a loss right now. But then Brentford at home, Bournemouth away, Brighton home, Leeds home, Wolves away. Wolves away being another bogey game for us, but
it's a real
one
bogey,
that you should expect to win. And, honestly, you look even at as that extends into March and April, Chelsea at home, United away, another bogey game, but don't necessarily expect them to be good. West Ham home, Forest, who I expect to take a major step back, away, Sunderland home, Fulham away. That post-festive period over the past couple years has been a time where we have turned it on a little bit. You saw that this year, particularly as we got into March, April, May. That could be a time where there will be a lot of points against a lot of teams that will either be around us in mid-table or just marginally above us in the cases of Newcastle and Chelsea, depending on where you think Villa's going to net out. There's a lot of teams in and around that you need to be getting points again, and hopefully we are hitting our stride at that point in the season as well.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. So I think that means we both probably agree on the period that's most difficult, which is in and around the festive period and beginning in December. Like just for example, we play Arsenal twice in the span of like 3 weeks, which is a real strange quirk of the schedule. But we play Arsenal on December 6th and then play them again on December 30th. So since we agree, is there anything you want to add? Because I'll
just say May.
May.
Spurs at home, Burnley away, Liverpool home, City away.
Depending, do you think Spurs are going to take a step up this season, though?
Well, I was going to say that depends on what you think Spurs is going to be this year. Is Champions League going to galvanize them? I do really like Thomas Frank as a manager. You don't necessarily know what you're going to expect from them from him week in, week out. He's very tactically versatile. So, they could be good. If they're not, then May isn't that difficult. But that's the other one that I'm looking at as could potentially be sticky, especially if we're in a situation like we're in right now, or this past year, I should say, where we needed every point in those last games of the season and didn't necessarily get them.
Yep. So now I actually forgot what I was going to ask you now. Oh, no, I do remember. Never mind. I remember. So how do you feel about no games on Boxing Day?
I mean, I like from a personal perspective, I just like the day after Christmas being able to turn it on. But that being said, and this is also a personal thing, I'm always watching those games on delay anyway because we always go snowboarding and skiing at Christmas. So on Boxing Day, we're up early and we're out on the mountain while those games are usually being played, and we might be back in time to either watch the 12:30 on kind of our lunch break, or if it happens to go late enough to like 2:30, we can obviously be back. So it actually doesn't bother me that much, just because if it's on the 27th, it's more likely I'll actually be able to watch.
All right. I mean, that is not the reaction that is coming from England, let me tell you. And I understand it. I mean, I get it.
Yeah, it's tradition. It'd be like moving the NBA to Boxing Day from Christmas Day.
Right. Or like the Lions not playing on Thanksgiving, right? That sort of thing. So I understand that. And truthfully don't totally understand the logic behind it from the Premier League. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish there. From a branding standpoint, it doesn't make sense. It's just what you've always done, which isn't necessarily a good reason to keep doing something.
Day. But you should own that day. You should be upset about other people encroaching on that day. You shouldn't give up.
Right. Exactly right. 100% right. Because no one, I shouldn't say no one, but very few, particularly international fans, are going to be tuning in to championship games or League One games on that day, on Boxing Day. They're all going to be watching the slate of fixtures that's on NBC and Peacock and all those things in here in America, for example. It just, from a marketing and branding standpoint, I was kind of taken aback by the idea that they would want to give up on Boxing Day and let the lower leagues have that.
Now, I'll admit, because it doesn't affect me all that much, I have not read into this, but are they leaving open the possibility to flex games onto Boxing Day? Because that would be an interesting strategy that at some point you could pick from, let's say, I only know that Villa is playing Chelsea, but let's say that they were playing Burnley. Yeah. And so that wasn't a game scheduled for Boxing Day. All of a sudden, Burnley go on a run and they're, pushing Europe. That would be a game that you flex in, kind of like the NFL does. That would be smart. As far as I know, no. They are not. But the NFL doesn't flex Thanksgiving either. You know what I mean? That's set from the beginning of the season on. So yeah. But it was a strange move to me. That's why I wanted your opinion on it as well. Yeah. The only other things I wanted to mention, I don't know if you have anything else. Weird that we play City and Liverpool back to back twice.
Yeah.
And the other one that John Townley tweeted out, and I have not verified this, so we'll have to take him at his word. Apparently 6 out of our 8 Europa League group stage games are going to be followed by home matches at Villa Park. So one of the areas where we lost a ton of points this year were the matches immediately following Champions League games. We'll talk about that if we ever get to an analysis of the season on the whole. But a lot of those were games that probably should have been won. So to at least have them at home where Villa has been much stronger in the Unai Emery era gives us some hope that we'll perform better this year.
Not just much stronger, one of the best teams in Europe at home under Unai Emery. They're crazy good at home. But yeah, I also trust that John Townley got it right because I saw it in other places as well. So and he's pretty reliable. More reliable than you or me, for example, except when it came to naming rights.
Except when it comes to naming rights.
Nailed it.
Yeah. So, Chris, any other areas of the schedule that stuck out to you that you wanted to talk about?
No, I thought the call out by you with Liverpool City back-to-back both times, that's crazy. Like, that's just a crazy quirk. And whatever computer does this schedule clearly doesn't take into account how difficult that is to do.
Jesus, no.
Yeah.
All right. So we just talked about the schedule. Let's talk at least for a minute about what potentially needs to change going into next season. And I've got 4 things here that I noted. I wonder what you have. I would like to start, if you don't mind, though.
Go ahead.
Because this is, I think, after doing the research myself, one of the more interesting debates that we can have this offseason. It is about our striker, one Oliver Watkins, who I will admit I have been fairly harshly critical of this past season with the opportunities that he's missed. So I wanted to do some research to see, am I right? Is the eye test backed up by some of the data, or the people who just say, he accounted for 24 goals and assists in the EPL this year. Like, he's fine. Everybody else who says that he should score more is grossly over-exaggerating. So, Chris, I'm just going to read out a variety of different stats and performances for you. On the whole, in the EPL, he actually overperformed his expected goals by 0.7. He shattered his expected assists by nearly 4.7. Now, expected assist, that's him passing to somebody who probably does more with it. I don't know that you necessarily give that to him, but still, Interesting stat. In the Champions League, however, he underperformed his expected goals by 2.2. He only scored once, but he did once again outperform his expected assists by 1.4. So I decided to try and cut the data a little bit further in a bunch of different ways. This is the EPL only. I tried to identify opportunities where he significantly outperformed his expected goals. So what did I consider an outperformance? If he had a 0.4 or lower and wound up scoring anyway, or if he had multiple goals, if it was greater than that kind of margin. The reason for that is because when you kind of define expected goals, and I think most people know this, but 0.5 could roughly be described as a goal that you would be expected to be scored half the time. If it's an elite striker, one of those opportunities I would expect to be converted at a much higher rate, right? Expected goals is kind of like replacement level striker, aka not Ollie Watkins. A penalty, for frame of reference, is roughly a 0.76 to 0.79 expected goals. So like 0.5, a little bit lower than a penalty, but like penalties should be gimmies. Ollie Watkins penalties are probably a 0.5, but still. So how many times did he score when it was a 0.4 or lower? He actually did that 8 times, and 9 of his 16 goals were in these kind of situations. That's over half his production in the league. Now, these goals were in. I wanted to look at what the competition was. 3-2 win versus Everton. He scored twice. Theoretically wins us that game. 3-1 win versus Wolves. Maybe not necessary. 2-2 draw versus Ipswich. 3-1 win versus Fulham. Then he actually never outperformed his expected goals from October 19th until February 19th. And I think that's when a lot of us got on his back and when John Duran really came onto the scene. Then he outperformed in a 2-2 draw versus Liverpool, a 3-0 win versus Southampton, the 4-1 win versus Newcastle, and then our final 1-0 win versus Bournemouth. There's some good teams in there. There's some bad teams in there. There's some blowouts in there. There's some games where he earned us points. So I want to look at the opposite. Well, did we feel this way because he had some great underperformances where we thought that he should have scored a bunch or should have at least scored once and didn't? So I looked at the 0.5s and above where he didn't score. This, fewer, only 6 times. He did not score in, yet having a high expected goals, the 2-0 loss versus Arsenal, which we all agreed we played great, but ultimately threw it away late. The 2-1 win versus Leicester, the 4-1 loss versus Spurs, 3-0 loss versus Chelsea, the other 2-1 win versus Leicester, and then our 2-1 win versus Chelsea late in the season. The rest of his goals were in a draw versus Crystal Palace, 3-1 win versus Brentford, 2-2 Brighton, 1-0 Everton, 2-2 Arsenal, 1-1 Ipswich, 1-0 Brentford. So what's my final verdict on all of this? You can make of it what you want. Did he score against the best teams? Sometimes not really. But did his goals get us points? Yes. Did he outperform his expected goals in meaningless games? Absolutely he did. And did he underperform in games that maybe didn't matter? Also, yes. I think what we're saying here is that you can't really prove or disprove either side of the debate here. Both people are probably valid if you're looking at all the numbers. It's really, as with any stats, what you choose to make of it or believe. Where I net out, I think, if I'm going to give this my lukewarmiest of lukewarm takes, yes, there's equal credence to he was great as he kind of let us down for a truly elite striker. But if you are elite, there need to be more, like overwhelmingly more evidence for he was great than he let us down. In 2024-25, that wasn't the case. In 2023-24, that absolutely was the case. But I think there's some validity to people having some frustrations, but probably not to the degree that I and some other people got on his back this season.
Well, I think what you can really take from all that, and that's a ton of data and a ton of research. I think what you really take from that is it's a long season, and he was an up and down striker, just like he's been for much of his career. And I think the most interesting fact that you pulled out of that was the games. Oh, sorry, George just barked. That's George joining the podcast.
Welcome, George.
Yeah. hang on 1 second while I go let these dogs out because they're going nuts about something in the yard. I'll be right back.
I'll keep talking then. So the only thing that I'll add on top of all of that is, you could then look at the Champions League, which was even harder to analyze. He only ever got an expected goals above 0.2 against Young Boys and Celtic, 2 games that Villa scored a bunch of goals. Now, could that be down to his play and him not making himself available? Sure could. We did criticize him for that at times, but it also could be teammates not getting him the right opportunities. He also did not start a lot of our Champions League games. You saw a lot of John Durant towards the end of the campaign. You saw a lot of Marcus Rashford. So he didn't necessarily get the opportunity that he did in the league. I'm kind of throwing that one away in my analysis. And now the dogs are out. Chris is back. So please finish your thoughts.
What I was going to say was one of the areas where he overperformed his expected goals were when he had particularly low XG and he would score. And I think some of that is because of what we've often talked about, where it's a total reaction play, and he gets a toe to the ball and puts it in the net. Whereas, so that's, something that's worth, just as a number I'm throwing out there, 0.2 XG, right? Whereas a ball where he has time to think about it and he's going to underperform that XG, where you think he's easily going to score and he ends up kicking it right to the keeper, for example, like that's worth 0.6 and he doesn't score there. So he underperforms. So I think the data correlates with what our eyes tell us pretty much week in and week out.
Interesting analysis. What about you, Chris? What do you think needs to change going into next season?
I think if I could change one thing, it'd be the first shot on target not going into the back of the net, and we seem to improve on that toward the end of the season. But that was a crushing thing, and I think the thing that you and I talked about the most after the season, I know you and I sent some articles back and forth about it. I mean, the difference in Champions League or not Champions League for Villa this season was the number of late goals they surrendered. That had they not given up so many goals in the last 15, 20 minutes, they would be in the Champions League right now. And we wouldn't be having the same discussions that we had a couple of weeks ago about PSR or today about PSR. So those are the 2 biggest changes. And I don't know how you do that as a manager outside of mentality, and you get the players to understand that it's a 90-minute game. You can't switch off at any point. You can't switch off just because it's early or they're taking their first shot or whatever it may be, because that to me, those two things, the concessions late and always or often surrendering the first shot on target, it's more to me about mentality than ability. And I think you just have a case sometimes of, in a long season, guys are prone to switching off when they're not used to this level of competition for a consistent season like that. And let's be honest, Champions League is a big jump up from Conference League, and the schedule means more, the games mean more, all those sort of things happen. And then you've got the pressure to stay in Champions League, which we didn't have before. So that's just, I think mentality is what needs to change for the team next season.
It's interesting though, because Chris, there's under Unai Emery, there's always been something that Villa have been repeatedly bad at, that we have had some variation of our definition of insanity conversation. Because you remember the year that we qualified for Champions League. Remember when we were conceding on like every single corner, and instead of the last 15 minutes of the game, it was like the first 10 minutes coming out of half. You had that running tally that just never changed all year long. This year we fixed that. And then we have the first shot on target and the final 15-minute goals. So I don't know. We'll talk about, again, Unai Emery in the recap of the season, but I'm beginning to wonder if there is something about his dogmatic nature and style of play and the things that he tries to get a team to do, that is always going to leave them vulnerable to some kind of counterpunch once that counterpunch is identified. So to me, it's not mentality. I think that there is something in tactical flexibility that they need to change going into next season to address those issues.
Interesting point. Yeah, interesting point.
Last thing I have is just a full year of health in Boubacar Kamara, because
if we can
just
get
see the great difference that he made. So he needs to sign a contract, and we need to keep the team healthy for a full year.
If we can get it, that's all that is. Yeah. But yes, I agree. I mean, and another year of growth from Tielemans, I think, is coming up. But we'll see what happens there. We still have another week of PSR.
Anything else you want to add?
I don't think so, other than I'm losing the dogs here, and as much as I love their appearance on the pod, they seem to be getting antsy about something. So I'd like to thank our special guest George and Zuzu for this week's podcast.
They're antsy, and our listeners are antsy to find out what we're doing with the rest of this summer, Chris, aren't they? So let's give a little teaser. Next week, I think, is probably when we'll do our power ranking of the squad. By likelihood, they will be sold. We will have crossed June 30th by that point, so we can see if there was a sale and what that impacts moving forward. At some point, we'll do an off-season primer on what else we should be looking for from Villa over the balance of the window as we look forward to next year. We'll look forward to your annual review of Villa's financial books and a deep dive there. I will get my pillow ready for my evening nap. We're also trying to get a few more interviews lined up. So there are 2 Villa legends that we are in contact with that we are trying to schedule. And I'm being 100% serious. You will know and will want to hear from these people.
Why would they want to talk to 2 Yanks?
Because we are lovely people, Chris. That's why. We are well-connected, lovely people. And speaking of connections, we are going to try and get our dear friend Paul Faulkner back on the pod for a full PSR edition. He gave some great insight. If any of you are new, by the way, scroll back in our feed to our interview with Paul Faulkner, and local Birmingham legend, former sheriff of the West Midlands. Just go check that out, because that was a super insightful conversation that we had with the 2 of them. So we'll see if we can get him back for a PSR, and then some other fun random ideas when things get quiet, but we won't tease those now because Chris is already standing up ready to run off screen. So with that, Chris, this has been fun. It's great to see your face again. Please don't leave me forever. We will talk soon. And until then, my friend, up the Villa.
Up the Villa between dog barks.
Oh my God, he actually got in there. All right, we're out.
Hi, Mom and Dad.